The Council's treachery toward a human envoy unleashes the Baba Yaga. Part 1. The Weight of an Olive Branch. The stars outside the viewport did not move. They never did, not really. They just sat there, cold and far away, like old men watching something happen that they had seen 1,000 times before. Nora Holt stood at the glass and looked at them anyway. She had always found something honest about deep space. It did not lie to you. It did not tell you things were going to be fine. It just showed you how small everything was, and let you decide what to do with that. She was 46 years old. Her hair was dark brown with a little gray starting at the temples, and she wore it pulled back tight when she was working, which was almost always. She was not tall, not imposing, not the kind of person who filled a room when she walked in. But when she spoke, people listened. Her voice carried something in it that was hard to name. A kind of weight that came not from anger or authority, but from the simple fact that she meant every word she said. She was Earth's appointed envoy to the Galactic Concord, and right now she was standing on the diplomatic vessel Enduring Word, 3 days out from a station called Meridian Reach, holding a data tablet with the peace proposal she had spent 14 months writing. She set the tablet down on the small table beside her bunk and sat. The ship hummed around her, quiet and steady. There was a knock at her cabin door. "Come in," she said. Lieutenant Owen Briggs stepped inside. He was 29, with a square jaw and careful eyes, the kind of young man who had been told all his life that he was good at staying calm in bad situations. He was. She had seen his file. 3 combat deployments, 2 commendations, 0 complaints from anyone he had ever served under. He had been assigned as her security escort by Fleet Command, and he took the job seriously. Maybe a little too seriously sometimes, but she respected that about him. "We're on schedule," he said. "Dock at Meridian Reach in 71 hours. Station control confirmed our approach window this morning." "Good," she said. "How is Carl?" Owen's expression softened just slightly. "Dr. Vance is fine. He's been up since 0400, reviewing the Keth dialect files again. He said something about a tonal shift in formal addresses that he wants to get right before we sit down with the council." Nora almost smiled. That sounds like him. Dr. Carl Vance was 61, round-faced, gray-haired, and completely incapable of walking past a language problem without stopping to solve it. He had spent 20 years learning how to talk to species that had no interest in being talked to. Nora trusted him completely. "Tell him to get some sleep," she said. "We're going to need him sharp, not exhausted." Owen nodded and left. Nora looked back at the stars. She thought about what the treaty meant. Not just the trade routes, not just the shared defense clauses or the resource agreements. Those were important, but they were not the heart of it. The heart of it was simpler than that. Humanity had been living in a kind of quiet tension with the Concord for decades. Not war, but not peace either. A long, careful silence where both sides watched each other, and neither fully trusted what they saw. This treaty was a chance to end that. A real chance. Not a temporary agreement, not a delay. An actual end. She wanted it very badly. She picked the tablet back up and started reading from the beginning. 3 light years away, on Meridian Reach, the lights in the High Council chamber were dimmed. It was not a public session. There were no scribes, no junior delegates, no observers from the member worlds. There were only 7 beings sitting around the curved table at the center of the room, and every one of them had agreed, before they entered, that nothing said inside would leave. Councillor Vron stood at the head of the table. He was Keth, tall, thin-limbed, with wide, pale eyes that caught light strangely in the dark room. He had served on the Concord's senior council for 31 years, and he had a reputation among his peers as a being who did not waste words. What he said, he meant. What he planned, he finished. He pressed a single control on the table, and a holographic display rose above it. Charts, graphs, ship registry data, construction projections. All human, all classified, all somehow obtained. "This is 30 years of growth," he said. "You have all seen pieces of this data before. Tonight, you are seeing all of it together." The room was silent. "Their shipbuilding capacity has increased by 412% since the Concorde's last formal assessment," Vron continued. "Their AI-integrated combat doctrine has made them effectively unreadable in engagement modeling. And then there is this." He pressed another control. A single file opened. It had no images, no detailed schematics, just a name, pulled from deep intercepts, Baba Yaga. "Our intelligence division has spent 3 years trying to understand what this program is," Vron said. "They have not been able to. They know it is a ship, or possibly a weapons platform, or possibly something that does not fit into either category. They know it exists. They know it is operational. And they know that humanity has never once referenced it in any diplomatic channel, any open communication, or any registered fleet document." Another silence, longer this time. One of the other delegates, a broad-shouldered Orani named Consul Desh, leaned forward. "You are saying they have been hiding it deliberately. I am saying that a species does not leave something unnamed in every official record by accident," Vron said. "They named it. They just named it somewhere we were not supposed to hear." Desh was quiet for a moment. "And the Envoy? She arrives in 3 days." "Yes," Vron said, "with a peace proposal." He let those last 2 words sit in the air for a moment. "The proposal is real. The woman who wrote it believes in it completely. That is not in question." He looked around the table. "The question is whether we can afford to let humanity into this Concorde as a full partner, knowing what they are building, knowing what they are capable of, knowing that in 20 years they may not need us to agree to anything." He turned off the display. The room went dark again. "I have a plan," he said. "It requires a vote, and it requires that everyone in this room understands. There will be no going back from it." The vote took 11 minutes. It was unanimous. Nora Holt was still reading when the enduring word crossed into Concorde-monitored space. A small alert appeared in the corner of her tablet. Standard entry acknowledgement. Nothing unusual. She dismissed it and kept reading. Owen Briggs walked the ship's short corridor one more time before turning in, checking the docking seals, the communication array, the emergency signal panel near the aft hatch. Everything was where it was supposed to be. Dr. Carl Vance fell asleep at his desk with his headset on, a Kef dialect file playing softly on a loop. The enduring word moved through the dark, steady and quiet, carrying 3 people who still believed that what waited for them at Meridian Reach was a beginning. The Council's treachery toward a human envoy unleashes the Baba Yaga. The betrayal at Meridian Reach. The station was beautiful, in the way that things built to impress always are. Meridian Reach sat at the crossing point of 3 major transit lanes, and whoever had designed it had wanted every visitor to feel small the moment they stepped inside. The ceilings were high, the corridors were wide. The floors were made of a pale stone that caught the overhead light and gave it back in soft, cold waves. Everything about the place said, "We have been here a long time, and we will be here long after you are gone." Nora walked through it with her chin up. She had been in rooms like this before, not this exact station, not this exact stone floor, but rooms designed to do the same thing. She had learned a long time ago that the best response to a space that was trying to make you feel small was to simply refuse. So, she walked at an even pace, kept her shoulders back, and looked at everything with calm, steady eyes. Owen walked 2 steps behind her on the left. Carl walked on her right, already studying the architectural details with the quiet excitement of a man who found everything interesting. The welcoming party was made up of 4 Concorde aides and a mid-level station official named Tas Varin, who shook hands with the human greeting gesture, practiced, not natural, and told them the council was very much looking forward to the discussions ahead. His voice was smooth. His eyes were not quite meeting Nora's. She noticed. She said nothing. The first day went well. The council chamber was round, with each delegation seated in a curved arc, facing the center. Nora presented the opening framework of the Terran proposal: trade access, shared patrol corridors, a joint communication relay program. She spoke clearly and simply, pausing often so Carl could work through the translation layers in real time. The council members listened. Some asked questions. The questions were reasonable. The atmosphere was, if not warm, at least functional. On the walk back to their assigned quarters that evening, Carl told her he thought the Keth delegate had been particularly engaged. Vron asked good questions, he said. Detailed ones. The kind you only ask if you've actually read the document. Good, Nora said. Owen said nothing. He was watching a set of 4 station guards, who had changed positions between the morning session and the afternoon one. They were now stationed closer to the corridor that led back to the docking ring. He did not say anything about it that night. He filed it in the back of his mind and kept watching. The second day was much the same. More framework. More questions. Carl was in his element, smoothing over 3 different moments where translation had created small misunderstandings before they could grow into anything larger. Nora was steady throughout, answering every question directly, never overselling, never backing down. By the end of the session, she felt, cautiously, that something real might be happening. That evening, Owen came to her cabin and closed the door behind him. I want to flag something, he said. She set her tablet down. Go ahead. He told her about the guards, the repositioned units, the sealed side corridors he had passed on the way to the meal hall that morning, the way one of the council aides had looked at their diplomatic bag when she thought no one was watching her. Nora listened to all of it. She was quiet for a moment after he finished. Owen, she said, I hear you, and I want you to know I take it seriously. But we are on the second day of the most important diplomatic meeting humanity has had in 30 years. I cannot walk into that chamber tomorrow with suspicion all over my face because of a guard rotation and a sealed door. She looked at him. Stand down. Trust the process. He did not look satisfied, but he nodded. Yes, ma'am, he said, and left. The third day started the same way the first 2 had. Nora took her seat. Carl set up his translation equipment. The council filed in one by one and settled into their positions. For about 20 minutes, the session continued where it had left off. Resource-sharing agreements, the troll zone definitions. Then Councillor Vron stood up. The room shifted. It was subtle. A small tightening, like something that had been wound carefully, was finally being released. Vron's voice was calm and even as he spoke. He said that before the discussions could continue, the council had an obligation to raise a matter of serious concern. He said that Concord intelligence had, over the past several months, uncovered evidence of a Terran surveillance network operating covertly inside Concord space. He said the network had been active for at least 3 years, and that it had been collecting data on council communications, fleet positions, and internal deliberations. He said the evidence had been reviewed by all senior council members. He said it was definitive. Nora felt the floor shift under her, not physically, but in the way that the whole shape of a situation can change in a single sentence. She opened her mouth to respond. She never got the chance. The chamber doors opened, and Concord security came through them. Not 2 guards, not 4, but 12, moving in the practiced way of people who had been told exactly where to go and what to do when they got there. Owen was on his feet before anyone else in the room. He moved in front of Nora without thinking, hand going toward the sidearm at his hip that he had never once expected to use on a diplomatic station. He didn't draw it. 2 security officers hit him with stun batons from either side. He went down hard, and was dragged out through the side door before he could get back up. Carl stood very still, with his hands raised. They took him by the arms, and walked him out without a word. She looked at Vron across the room, as the security officers came to her side, and she held his gaze for a long moment. He looked back at her. There was no satisfaction in his expression, no anger either, just the flat, finished look of a being who had made a decision and closed a door. "This is a mistake," she said. Her voice was steady. "You know it is." Vron said nothing. The holding cell was small and white and very quiet. They had taken her tablet, her communicator, and her shoes. That last detail had always struck her as the strangest part of any detention, the shoes. She sat on the narrow bench along the wall, and breathed slowly, and thought about what she knew. The charges were manufactured. She was certain of that. No surveillance network existed. The evidence was fiction, built well enough to hold up in front of the Council's member worlds, and nowhere else. She thought about Owen. She hoped he was alive. She thought he probably was. Killing the security attaché of a human envoy created a different kind of problem than arresting one. She thought about Earth, about the radio silence that would be spreading out from this station right now, swallowing every signal her ship tried to send. She sat very still for a long time. Then she pressed the inside of her left forearm against her knee in a specific spot with a specific pressure, 3 times in 4 seconds. Somewhere beneath her skin, a subdermal transmitter that had been implanted during her pre-mission medical screening sent a single encoded pulse outward on a channel that the Concorde's jammers had not been built to detect, because no one outside of a very small room on Earth knew it existed. The pulse carried 4 words: Envoy compromised, location unknown. Then there was nothing left to do but wait. The Council's treachery toward a human envoy unleashes the Baba Yaga. Earth receives the signal. The pulse arrived at Fleet Command Station Ardent at 0312 hours, Mars Standard Time. It came in quietly, the way all the most serious things do. No alarm, no flashing light, no automated voice reading it out over a speaker. It simply appeared in the encrypted monitoring queue of a single terminal, in a room that had no windows, staffed at that hour by one junior signals officer named Danny Cole, who was 24 years old and on his 4th consecutive overnight shift. Danny almost missed it. He had been refilling his coffee when the soft chime sounded. He set the cup down, walked back to the terminal, and read the message twice. Then he picked up the direct line to the duty commander and said, with a voice that was trying very hard to stay level, "Sir, we have a priority alpha signal from the Envoy channel." 12 minutes later, Admiral Pete Harlan was standing in that same room, in a gray shirt and uniform trousers, reading the 4 words on the screen. Envoy compromised, location unknown. He read them a 3rd time. Then he straightened up and stood very still for a moment, the way a man does when he is making sure his thinking is clear before he lets himself feel anything about what he is looking at. Pete Harlan was 60 years old. He had gray hair cut close to his head and a face that had spent a long career learning not to show what it was thinking. He had served in 3 conflicts, commanded 2 fleet divisions, and had sat in rooms where very bad decisions had been made, and had spent the years since then making sure he understood exactly why those decisions had been bad. He was not a man who panicked. He was not a man who rushed. But he was also not a man who waited when waiting was the wrong choice. He turned to Danny Cole. "Get me a full blackout on this signal. No copies, no logs outside of this room, no transmission to any open channel. And get me a secure line to the President's office in Geneva, now." Danny nodded and moved fast. President Alan Webb picked up on the 2nd ring. He was already awake. He had been awake for an hour, reading the overnight briefing reports in the small study off his private quarters in the Geneva compound. He was 58, lean, with the kind of tired eyes that came not from lack of sleep, but from too many years of carrying weight that didn't go away when you closed them. Harlan told him what the signal said. He told him when it arrived, how it arrived, and what the subdermal transmitter protocol meant in practical terms. That Nora Holt had used her absolute last option, which meant every other option had already been taken away from her. Webb was quiet for a long moment. "Is there any diplomatic path left?" he asked. His voice was calm. He was asking because he needed to know, not because he hoped for a particular answer. Harlan thought about the question carefully, because it deserved that. Then he said, "Mr. President, the moment the Concorde jammed the enduring word, they made a choice. That was not a mistake. That was not a miscommunication. You do not jam a diplomatic vessel by accident. If we try to talk our way through this, we are telling every species in that Concorde that they can do this to our people and face nothing but more talking." Another silence, longer. "All right," Webb said. "What do you need from me?" "Two authorizations," Harlan said. "First, a full withdrawal order for all human diplomatic personnel currently operating in Concorde-adjacent space, effective immediately." He paused. "Second, Standing Order 7. The line was so quiet that Harlan could hear the faint hum of the relay satellite the call was routing through. "Standing Order 7, Webb repeated slowly. "That has never been activated." "No, sir," Harlan said. "It hasn't." Another pause. Then Webb said, "Both authorizations granted. Keep me informed at every stage." And the line closed. Harlan went to a different room. This one was smaller, deeper inside the station, accessible only through two biometric locks and a manual key that Harlan kept on his person at all times. There was no terminal in this room. There was only a chair, a table, and a communications unit that was not connected to any standard network. It ran on a separate power supply. Its signal bounced through 4 relay points before it reached its destination, and each relay point wiped its own routing record the moment the call passed through it. Harlan sat down, entered a 12-digit access code, and waited. The line connected after 19 seconds. "I'm here," said the voice on the other end. It was a woman's voice, low, unhurried, with the kind of steadiness that did not come from being relaxed, but from being so completely prepared for bad news that bad news had simply stopped being surprising. Commander Lena Drake did not appear in any Concorde intelligence file. She was not listed in any public fleet registry. If you searched her name in the standard Terran military personnel database, you would find a service record that ended 8 years ago with an honorable discharge and no further information. Everything after that discharge existed in a file that required 3 separate authorization levels to access, and that most admirals in the fleet did not know was there. What Lena Drake commanded was a single vessel, the Pale Morning. It was a deep black long-range strike ship, narrow and fast, built without a single surface that returned a clean sensor reading. It had been running dark in the outer transit lanes for the past 4 years, quiet and patient, doing the kind of work that could never be officially described. Harlan had worked with Lena Drake twice before. He trusted her the way you trusted a blade, completely, within the specific purpose it was made for. "You've seen the signal," he said. It was not a question. "I pulled it when it came in," she said. "I've been waiting for your call." "The Envoy is detained on Meridian Reach," he said. "Her attaché and her linguist are with her. Status unknown beyond the initial signal. The station has full comms jamming on our vessel in dock." He paused. "I need you to bring them home." "Understood," she said. "And the station?" Harlan thought about how to say the next part. "I want the Concorde to remember this," he said. "I don't want fires. I don't want bodies. I want them to remember that we came, that we took our people back, and that there was nothing they could do about it. I want that to sit with them for a very long time." There was a brief pause on the line. Then Lena said, "So you want me to bring her home and make a point?" "Both," Harlan said. "Understood," she said again. The line closed. Harlan sat in the small room for a moment before he got up. He thought about Nora Holt in a holding cell somewhere inside a station 3 light-years away. He thought about what she must be thinking right now, sitting in the quiet, not knowing whether the signal had gone through, not knowing whether anyone was coming. He hoped she was the kind of person who could hold on a little longer. He thought she probably was. On the pale morning, in the outer dark between transit lanes, Lena Drake set the signal report down on the console beside her and looked at the navigation screen for a moment, without speaking. Then she turned to her crew and said 2 words. "Spin up." The ship came alive around her, like something that had been sleeping and was very glad to finally wake. The Council's treachery toward a human envoy unleashes the Baba Yaga. What the Council unleashed. The first sign that something was wrong came at 0611 hours, station time. A junior communications officer on Meridian Reach, named Brell, young, diligent, always the first one at his post, noticed that the long-range relay network had gone quiet. Not down, not broken, just quiet. Signals were still moving through the system, but the outer relay towers were no longer returning their regular confirmation pings. He ran a diagnostic. The diagnostic came back clean. He ran it again. Same result. Everything looked fine. Nothing was fine. He flagged it to his supervisor. His supervisor told him it was probably a calibration drift, and to log it for the morning maintenance crew. Brell logged it. He sat back down at his terminal. He kept watching the screen. 2 minutes later, the entire defense grid targeting system went dark. Not a sector glitch. All of it, from the outer perimeter cannons to the point defense clusters ringing the docking arms, simply stopped responding. The screens that should have shown targeting data and threat assessments showed nothing but a flat, gray static. Brell stood up from his chair so fast he knocked it over. He was already reaching for the emergency alert panel when the alert went off on its own. By then, it was already too late to matter. The pale morning had been sitting 12 kilometers off the station's secondary docking collar for 6 minutes before anyone on Meridian Reach knew it was there. It had come in without a transponder signal, without a standard approach vector, without any of the dozens of electronic signals that a normal vessel broadcast simply by existing and moving through space. It had come in the way a shadow moves across a floor, present, real, and completely silent until you were already looking right at it. Lena Drake stood at the front of the bridge and looked at the station on the tactical screen. It was large and pale, and full of people who had made a very serious mistake. She did not feel anger about that. Anger was not useful right now. What she felt was focused, which was the thing she felt instead of anger when the situation required it. "Grid is down," said Dex Hollis from the navigation console without looking up. He was lean and quiet, with fast hands, and the habit of stating facts the way other people stated opinions, like they were simply the shape of the world and not worth arguing about. "Outer relays are isolated. They can talk to each other inside the station, but nothing is getting out." "Confirmed," said the systems officer to his left. "Ray, you're clear to move." Specialist Ray Tuck led his 4-person unit through the secondary docking collar with the calm efficiency of someone who had done harder things in worse places. He was 35, not especially tall, with short dark hair and the kind of face that people tended to forget immediately, which had always been useful in his line of work. He carried a compact breaching kit, a close-range stun weapon, and a partial schematic of Meridian Reach's internal layout pulled from the files of a Concord deserter who had provided it 3 years ago in exchange for protection that humanity had quietly delivered. The schematic was not complete. It had gaps, whole sections of the station that had been built or modified after the deserter left. But it was enough to work with. Ray moved his unit through the access corridor in silence. The station's internal sensors were still running, which meant they had maybe 4 minutes before someone in the security hub noticed a door had been opened that should not have been opened. He kept that number in his head and moved accordingly. The first guard they encountered was at a junction near the maintenance level. He saw them and reached for his radio. Ray crossed the distance between them in 2 seconds and put him down with the stun weapon before the man got a single word out. Clean, quiet, no permanent harm, exactly as instructed. They moved deeper into the station. At the same time, on an open and completely unencrypted channel, a voice came through the station commander's personal communications unit. Station Commander Haas was a thick-set, gray-skinned Orani with 30 years of station management behind him. He had dealt with mechanical crises, political crises, 2 separate docking accidents, and a disease outbreak in the lower residential ring. He had never dealt with anything like this morning. He was standing in the operations center, surrounded by staff, who were all talking at once, and none of whom were telling him anything useful, when the transmission came through. He picked it up, because it was the only thing in the room that was quiet. "Commander Haas," said the voice. It was a woman's voice, even, unhurried, carrying no particular emotion. "My name is not important. What I command is. Your sensors have not been able to identify my vessel. Your defense grid is currently inactive. Your communication relays are isolated. None of this is permanent. I am not here to destroy your station." Haas said nothing. He was listening very carefully. "I am here for 3 people," the voice said. "Nora Holt, Lieutenant Owen Briggs, Dr. Carl Vance. You will bring them, unharmed, to your secondary docking collar. You will do this within 20 minutes. And you will tell every security officer between the holding level and that collar to stand aside and keep their hands where my people can see them." Haas looked at the tactical screen, still gray static, where the defense grid readout should have been. He looked at the communications board, dark, across every external channel. He pressed the transmit key. "And if I refuse?" A pause, short, not uncertain, just the pause of someone deciding how much to explain. "Then I wait," the voice said. "I am very good at waiting. Your defense grid will come back online eventually. And when it does, I will be close enough that it will not matter." Haas stared at the screen for 3 seconds. Then he gave the order. Ray Tuck found Nora Holt 11 minutes into the operation. She was sitting on the bench in her cell, exactly as she had been sitting for the past 2 days. Back straight, hands in her lap, eyes forward. When the cell door opened and she saw Ray's face, she did not cry or collapse or throw her arms around him. She stood up, looked him in the eye, and said, "Where are the others?" "Finding them now," Ray said. "Can you walk?" "Yes," she said. "Let's go." Owen was in a medical holding room 2 corridors over. His right wrist was in a brace, and there was dried blood along his lower lip from where he had hit the floor after the stun batons dropped him. When Ray's unit came through the door, Owen was already standing. He had heard them in the corridor, and had positioned himself beside the door. He saw Nora, and something in his face went loose with relief for just a moment before it went solid again. Carl was in a standard detention room, sitting on the floor cross-legged, with his eyes closed. He opened them when the door opened. He looked at Nora. He said, "I was starting to think the signal hadn't gone through." "It went through," she said. They were aboard the Pale Morning, with 4 minutes to spare. Lena Drake waited until she had confirmation that all 3 were aboard and secured. Then she opened the channel to the station one more time. "Commander Haas," she said, "your people are unharmed. Your station is unharmed. I want you to understand that was a choice, not a limitation." She paused. "The Terran Unified Government will be issuing a formal statement. I would suggest the Concord's member worlds read it carefully. And I would suggest that every species sitting on that council consider what it means that one human vessel came to your most secure diplomatic station, took down your grid, walked through your corridors, and left with exactly who it came for. And you never once got a clean sensor reading on us. She closed the channel. Dex, she said quietly. Already moving, Dex said. The pale morning slipped back into the dark between the stars, silent and clean, and in less than a minute, there was no sign that it had ever been there at all. In the operations center of Meridian Reach, Commander Haas stood in front of the gray static of his defense grid screen for a long time without saying anything. 2 consoles away, Brel sat very still at his terminal, staring at the spot in the sensor log where the ghost blip had appeared and disappeared before any of this started. He thought about flagging it for the report. Then he thought about what the report was going to look like already. Then he just left it where it was and said nothing. The Council's treachery toward a human envoy unleashes the Baba Yaga. The silence that speaks. The pale morning ran dark for 9 days before it crossed back into Terran space. There were no celebrations on board, no speeches, no toasts, no one slapping each other on the back in the corridor. The crew were not that kind of people, and Lena Drake was not that kind of commander. What there was, instead, was a quiet settling, the kind that comes after a thing has been done correctly, and everyone involved knows it. People did their jobs, they ate their meals, they slept in shifts. Ray Tuck sat in the small medical bay for an hour each evening and let the ship's medic check his hand, which he had cut on a doorframe during the extraction and had not mentioned until they were already 2 hours out from the station. Nora Holtz spent most of the journey in the small passenger cabin near the rear of the ship. She slept more than she expected to. Her body had been running on tension and discipline for days, and when the tension finally had nowhere left to go, it simply left, and the exhaustion underneath it rose to the surface all at once. She did not fight it. She let herself sleep, and when she was awake, she sat with a cup of coffee and looked at the dark outside the porthole, and thought about what came next. Owen Briggs was given a cabin of his own, but spent most of his time in the corridor outside Nora's door, sitting in a folding chair with his braced wrist resting on his knee. He did not say much. He did not need to. She knew he was there, and he knew she knew, and that was enough for both of them. Carl Vance wrote 17 pages of notes on a borrowed datapad. He said he wanted to document everything while it was still fresh. Lena asked him once what exactly he was documenting. He told her he was writing down every word the council delegates had said during the sessions, every shift in tone, every moment where the translation had felt slightly off in a way he had not understood at the time, but understood now. She looked at him for a moment. Then she told him to make a copy and give it to Harlan when they arrived. Carl made 2 copies. Admiral Pete Harlan met the pale morning personally at Station Ardent. He was standing on the docking platform when the ship came in, still and straight, hands behind his back, watching the landing with the focused attention of a man who had spent days waiting for this exact moment, and was not going to waste it by looking anywhere else. When the ramp came down and Nora walked out, he let out a breath that was very small and very quiet, and that no one nearby would have noticed, unless they were looking for it. He looked at her face, the tiredness in it, the steadiness still underneath the tiredness, and he said simply, "Good to have you back." "Good to be back," she said. He shook Owen's hand next, and looked at the brace on his wrist, and said nothing about it, because nothing needed to be said. Then he shook Carl's hand and told him he had heard about the notes, and that someone from the intelligence division would be in touch. Carl said that was fine, but that he wanted a copy of whatever report they produced, because he had earned it. Harlan almost smiled. Then he turned to Lena Drake, who was standing at the bottom of the ramp with her arms crossed, watching all of this without expression. "Clean work," he said. "It usually is," she said. He nodded once. She nodded back, and walked away down the platform, and that was the last that most people on Station Ardent ever saw of her. 3 weeks later, Nora Holt sat across from President Alan Webb in a quiet room in the Geneva compound. The room had tall windows that looked out over the gray water of the lake, and the morning light was coming through them flat and pale, the way it does in early winter. There was coffee on the table between them, and neither of them had touched it. Webb looked at her for a moment before he spoke. He had read every report, every signal log, every word of Carl's notes. He had been briefed 3 separate times by Harlan. He knew the full shape of what had happened, but he had wanted to hear it from her, in her own words, before he made any of the decisions that were waiting on his desk. She told him everything. She spoke plainly and in order, the way she always did, without anger and without drama. She told him about the sessions, about the moment Vron stood up, about the security officers coming through the doors, about the cell and the waiting and the pulse she had sent into the dark, not knowing if anyone would hear it. When she finished, Webb was quiet for a moment. "What do you want?" he asked her. He meant it as a full question, not just what action, not just what policy. What did she, Nora Holt, the person who had been put in a cell by people who had smiled at her across a table, actually want? She thought about it honestly. "I want the record corrected," she said, publicly. "I want every species in that Concord to know that the charges were fabricated. I want it stated clearly, in language that cannot be misread, that the Terran delegation came to Meridian Reach in good faith and was betrayed." She paused. "I don't want a war. I don't want punishment. I just want the truth to be the thing that is standing when this is over." Webb nodded slowly. "We're already working on it," he said. "And I can tell you that 3 Concord member species have quietly opened back channels in the last 2 weeks. They are not defending what the Council did. They are very carefully making sure we know they had no part in it." Nora looked at him. "The smaller ones," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," he said, "the ones who have always been nervous about how much power the Inner Council actually holds." He paused. What happened at Meridian Reach gave them a reason to say out loud what they had only been thinking privately. She sat with that for a moment. It was not the outcome she had planned for, but outcomes rarely were. Owen Briggs submitted his formal after-action report to Fleet Intelligence 10 days after returning to Earth. It was thorough, detailed, and written in the precise factual language that all such reports required. At the very end, in the section marked Additional Observations, he wrote one sentence that his supervising officer read 3 times before deciding to leave it exactly as it was. It said, "Next time the guards reposition mid-session, I am not standing down." He requested reassignment to Fleet Intelligence the same day. The request was approved within 48 hours, which was faster than almost any reassignment in recent memory. No one said why. Owen did not ask. On Meridian Reach, Counselor Vron faced an internal inquiry. It had not been called by humanity. It had been called by 4 of the Concord's smaller member species, who had drafted a formal complaint in careful, measured language that was nonetheless absolutely clear about what it was saying. They wanted to know, officially and on the record, how the decision to arrest a human envoy on fabricated charges had been made, who had made it, and why the full council had not been consulted before it was carried out. Vron sat before the inquiry panel and answered every question with the same flat patience he brought to everything. He did not apologize. He did not look afraid. But people who had known him a long time noticed that something in his expression had changed. A tightness around the eyes that had not been there before. The look of a being who had planned something carefully and had still, somehow, gotten a result he had not fully prepared for. Lena Drake filed no written debrief. This was not unusual for her. It was, in fact, the only way she ever operated. When Harlan asked her for something on record, she sent him a 7-second audio file. He listened to it alone in his office, with the door closed. It contained 3 words, spoken in the same level, unhurried voice she used for everything. Package delivered safely. He marked the mission file closed. He assigned it the highest classification level in the system. He locked it, and then he sat back in his chair and looked at the wall for a while. He thought about the Concorde, about 12 species sitting in their curved seats on a station that one human ship had walked through like it was not even there. He thought about the fear that must have moved through those species in the days since. Not the anger, not the outrage, but the quiet, creeping fear that came from understanding that the thing you had been most afraid of was not a rumor and not a weapon pointed at you, but something far more unsettling, something patient, something that had a name that was now moving through the dark between worlds in a whisper, passed from one species to the next, on the long routes between stations, spoken carefully and not very loudly, the way you speak a name when you are not entirely sure that saying it out loud might not, in some way, cause it to hear you. The Baba Yaga. It had come. It had done what it came to do. It had left without a scar on the wall or a body on the floor. And in leaving that way, quietly, cleanly, completely, it had made itself into something that no amount of guns or council votes or fabricated charges could touch. A story. And stories, as every species in the galaxy had learned in their own time and in their own way, last much longer than battles.